I think it's the time of the year for it. Performance reviews. They usually, depends on the workplace, but they usually have a performance review either immediately before or immediately after the Christmas party. I think that's a strategic move. But today happens to be exactly 1 year since the coalition government was formed. And so perhaps time for a performance review on the current government. What do you think of it so far? Joining us on the program now, political commentator and director of Democracy Project, Dr. Bryce Edwards. Bryce, kia ora.
Morena, Andrew.
When it comes to, I suppose, performance review, this is the time that they tend to do it, but it's also, of course, the time when everybody's probably thinking about Christmas and all of those types of things. It's probably a good time to slide in a performance review. And gosh, does it seem like a longer time or a shorter time to you? Because I was surprised to find out that today is the anniversary. It seems like it's been a long year, Bryce.
It has. This has been quite an extraordinary government for their first year in power. And I think you'd have to go back to Jim Bolger's government coming in 1990 to think about a similar one that did so much in 12 months. Now, I'm not meaning to suggest that this government is anywhere as radical or controversial as that Jim Bolger government that had, the mother of all budgets and Ruth Richardson and Employment Contracts Act, but they have actually done a lot. And I guess a lot of it has been rolling back things that the last government's done. And we're still yet to see exactly what this government, wants to achieve. Beyond just, rolling back reforms and being managerial, but there certainly has been a lot happening in 12 months. So, I think that's probably why it feels like it's been longer.
Looking at some of the gains, I suppose, some of the things that the government can take credit for, even if it's their fault or whether their policy caused it. The economy in much better space than it was a year ago. Inflation under control, interest rates looking like that might be a nice Christmas present for some mortgage holders.
There's no doubt about it. This government came to power on the weak economy because they were able to convince a lot of people that the cost of living, the management of the economy by the last administration wasn't good enough, and that they were going to turn things around. And some things have turned around, and so inflation down to 2.2%. Interest rates down. So there have been some wins there. Some critics might suggest that that would have happened regardless of who was in power, and maybe there's external events, but there's no doubt that this government has contributed. I think there's no doubt contributed to those the achievement of those things. Yes, we've still got some other negative points to the economy, rising unemployment. We've got all sorts of other things ailing the economy, especially productivity. And I guess this is where I'm interested in some of the voices from the right who have popped up recently and said, well, we've had a year of the government and they've done well on inflation, but they haven't really done anything transformational. They haven't really had any bold visions for restructuring the economy, dealing with productivity, getting economic growth. And so you've had the likes of, there's been a few economists on the right, but also Matthew Hooton wrote a very scathing column on Friday. And, of course, he's a very right of centre commentator. And, one might expect him to be a bit more positive about his own government, but it's probably the most scathing column or most scathing evaluation you could get, especially Luxon. Hooton paints Luxon really as a overconfident corporate manager that hasn't really understood either the National Party or New Zealand, and has blundered his way through things without giving us any real big bold changes.
Of course, of all of the party leaders in the coalition, Luxon has the least experience in politics, although experience more at a corporate level. It was always going to be a little bit of a three-legged race, except with 6 legs instead of 3. And if you can imagine that, 3 people tied together at the ankle trying to stay in step, it's a disaster waiting to happen. Having said that, the disaster hasn't really happened. No no meltdown, but no strong vision either, really. Is that because of that whole three-legged race aspect, do you think?
Look, I think it is an important part of the dynamic of this coalition that you've got David Seymour. He's not, he doesn't have a huge amount of experience in terms of leading a government or being a minister, but he has been a strong performer
Yeah.
as a politician. I think he's surprised people by just how ambitious he's been
Mm-hmm.
in pursuit of policy and reforms. And I would probably say that he's been the most ambitious in pursuit of really trying to put his his imprint on this government. And of course, Winston Peters is the most experienced
Yep.
politician in Parliament, and again another very strong-willed person. So of course, Luxon, has had to share the leadership with. It is a bit like what would you call it? A prime
Trifecta?
ministerial.
A
Three of
triumvirate.
them.
A
A
triumvirate.
triumvirate.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
right.
that's
Yes,
it. Yeah,
absolutely.
exactly.
So yes, so I think Luxon has been unfortunate to be overshadowed a bit from time to time by those people. But you're right. The coalition hasn't been a meltdown. It hasn't been the coalition of chaos that many critics were suggesting. Yeah, there's been some differences, but they've managed to keep it together. And of course, the Treaty Principles Bill is
Yep.
the one that's caused the most friction, pushed by Seymour and ACT, with a lot less enthusiasm, should we say, by National. But nonetheless, I still think that the government has kept it together
Yeah.
dealing with that. So it's not as bad as people might suggest. And I think you're seeing a lot of 1 year evaluations of this government that are really focusing on that Treaty Principles Bill
Mm-hmm.
as if it's the only thing that's happened or the biggest thing to happen during this government, and that it's some sort of big loss for the government. I'm just not so sure that's the case. I think that, yes, there's been a huge hikoi and there is huge anger with the government over it,
Yep.
but I would suggest that there would also be some support either for the bill or for the way the government's handled it,
Yep.
and allowing it to happen, but saying from National's point of view, we're going to vote this down anyhow. So we're just allowing people to have a debate. I'm not sure that's gone down so badly.
Yeah. Now, of course, year one, this is a 3-year term. To say that the government hasn't delivered, well, there's a grace opportunity, I suppose, and it usually is the case for a 3-year term that the middle year is the year of delivery. So maybe it's a good thing to get treaty principles out of the way, and if the government comes through with some gains, particularly some more gains in the economy and productivity and those sorts of things. Certainly still a challenging to-do list for the government. Not much of a Christmas break before they need to get back on with it in the new year.
That's right, because they haven't really turned everything around.
No.
And so you're seeing a lot of evaluations of this government in polls that suggest that people haven't turned on the government, but they're still not entirely convinced by them. And
Yep.
it's areas like health and housing, I think, that are the big problems for this government. And, they're big problems for any government that would be in power at the moment.
Yep.
But health, they haven't really managed to convince people that they know what they're doing and they're turning things around. I mean, yes, maybe the last government was a disaster on health, but I think this government is being poorly judged on that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Shane Moretti, I think he's quite an impressive politician in many ways, but he really has not been able to win the debates on this one. And I don't know if you saw it, Andrew, but there was in the weekend, the Post did a feature evaluating the different ministers, and he was one of the most scathed by that. I think he was given a rating of 3 out of 10.
Wow.
And I'm not sure how serious that 3 out of 10 is, but I do think it does resonate with me that health is one of the areas that the government's hurting on and aren't breaking through. So they may need to change him at some stage.
And may need to do better in that area between now and the next election. I mean, there will, of course, be shuffling around of various portfolios between now and then. Having said that, though, reasonably stable, not just within the coalition, but within the individual parties. I think when we look at the last term, National had several leaders, one year in to, well, they were in opposition, but still that had a bit of a revolving door there. You mentioned Christopher Luxon, not everybody's a fan. Do you think that he will be the Prime Minister going into the next election?
Look, I've got no reason to suggest there's any coups brewing against him, or that there's any great dissatisfaction in the coalition with him. Absolutely no sign of anything like that. But yes, I do believe that there's a good chance that come 2026 there could be someone taken on by National,
Yep.
because they can see that they would have a better chance of winning that election. People like someone like Erica Stanford in education are doing very well. I think she's getting universal praise at the moment. She's a really good communicator. So she's been one of the real talent, surprise talents of this government so far. Even Simeon Brown, I think, is doing quite well, and we might see that there's some sort of race in the future between Erica Stanford and Simeon Brown for the leadership. I could see either of them doing that. You're also seeing Chris Bishop being judged to be a very solid minister. I don't think he's likely to be a leader or a prime minister, but he's only going up at the stage. And it was interesting that the Post gave him a evaluation of 10 out of 10 on Saturday, which I thought was quite extraordinary. That doesn't happen often, that you get 10 out of 10.
No.
So something's right for him.
Certainly. And I suppose in this scenario, and this is something that Christopher Luxon does bring to the table, is this corporate background, but this is the way. If you're not producing the results for the shareholders or the stakeholders, if the company isn't performing, if people aren't getting the dividends, then the CEO's got to roll. And we may see that if next year isn't a year of delivery for the coalition government and for the National Party in particular. Bryce, thank you so much for your insights. As always, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Andrew.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.